I'm coming more under the persuasion that preaching against sexual sin is extremely important, yet at the same time, the vocabulary words that are used to preach about this have to be reined in and supervised by others. Editorial feedback is necessary, and I'm still working on it. If somebody wants to say I have a preoccupation with sexual immorality, they can. They could say the same thing about David Wilkerson. They could say the same thing about John R. Rice. They could say the same thing about Thomas Watson and Richard Baxter and anybody who had the guts to preach sermons against sexual immorality. Okay, 75% of people in the world right now are addicted to porn. So if this is getting in the way of people's salvation and their sense of the presence of God, it needs to be preached against. And there's nothing more likely to take the taste out of a person's heart for pornography than hearing a preacher talk about it, right? Like if you heard Billy Graham talking about pornography, would you want to go and look at some pornography? No. You'd be like, man, I can't put these two things together. On the one hand, there's pornography over here, and the other hand, there's a preacher. These things don't mix. Yeah, I know. It's like Phineas in the Old Testament taking the spear and taking all the desire out, right? So there has to be a way to be able to talk about this, communicate about this, and preach about this boldly with vocabulary words that don't offend the conscience. And I think I'm working on this, but I've gotten to the point where I think mentioning the M word is bad, M-A-S-T-U-R, that's bad because it's just too explicit and too graphic. It's too pornographic to mention that word. Saying the word pornography, porno, is fine because it doesn't conjure up an image necessarily. Sort of this general vocabulary word, and it can be discouraged. And I know that Wilkerson and Ravenhill use that word all the time, pornography. They just would say pornography. Okay, they didn't go into depth. They didn't explain. There was no explicit details, no explicit language. But to use the M word is bad. And although the King James Version uses the W word, W-H-O-R-E, I kind of am in the direction of saying, no, don't use that. Maybe it's bad to say H-O because it's, it's kind of like not a very serious way to talk about it. But one thing I know is that sexual immorality needs to be discouraged, and there should be a sense of shame associated with it. So I don't think any of those types of words should be used frequently, but like Thomas Beacon's sermon in the 1500s used the word about 50 times. But there needs to be a way to talk about this, and to talk about this boldly without tripping up over explicit words all the time. I think referring to a private part as an expression is clean enough to be able to say, okay, this is bad. Say if we're talking about trans issues, right? We're talking about people, quote, mutilating their private parts. That's horrible, right? That's horrible, but the Bible says we're supposed to make sin look exceedingly sinful and discourage it and be grieved about it, right? But we don't need to get really specific, right? To where it's going to create a word image, right? So we don't need to say the P word or the V word. We don't need to go there. And so what is explicit? Explicit, in my opinion, means detailed imagery, right? So there needs to be a way to be able to talk about this stuff, kind of like in the Song of Solomon. It's like they're talking about it, but they're not getting detailed with explicit imagery. And so I think the key to this is to avoid vocabulary words where it gets really, really detailed and conjures up a word picture right away that's pornographic. That needs to be avoided. The M word, any private part words, anything like that needs to be avoided. So that's what I'm at. Progressive sanctification is a growing process, and I think that if we're careful to watch our mouths, to watch your mouth as you preach about this, it'll get better and better over time. But that doesn't mean you stop preaching against sin. That doesn't mean you stop preaching against sexual sin. I think another huge, clear word in the Bible is fornication, which is actually related to the word pornography. in the Greek. So that's a fine word to use. Ray Comfort used that at the TPUSA event. That brought a lot of conviction. The objective is to bring conviction. We want people to have conviction of sin, say the word fornication, say the word adultery, so that they can come to the gospel and turn away from those sins. That's the point of evangelism.